Hello everybody, EricTheCarGuy here again. Today I thought I would combine something and make it a separate video. I'm working on the cylinder head on this 2000 Honda Accord, and I've removed a cylinder head and I need to reinstall it. In the process of reinstalling it, I'm going to have to retorque the cylinder head bolts, and I just thought I would make a video on just torquing cylinder head bolts. Let's do it. Now my first step basically involves cleaning the threads on the bolts themselves. I want to make sure there's no debris, no corrosion, no anything on these head bolts. On some cylinder heads, you actually have to replace the head bolts because they're called stretch bolts. Usually there's a good indication of this if in the torque specs, which we'll get to in a moment, it says that you need to tighten them with a degree wheel. That's usually a pretty good indication you have stretch bolts. But a way I like to find out, and is normally accurate, is to ask my parts professional, because many times if you're doing a head gasket job on a car that does have stretch bolts, then they come in a kit with the head gasket. But if they're reusable like these are in this Accord, what I like to do is get these threads all nice and clean before they install them in the vehicle. And I'll do this quite simply by just running them on my wire wheel. See, this one already has a small burr on it. You may be able to see there. And I'll do that for all the bolts. To help me keep track, I keep two separate piles. Now the next thing I do is I want to make sure that the holes that the bolts go into are just as clean as the bolts themselves. When you go to remove a cylinder head, a lot of times there may be coolant or something that gets down into the hole, or oil or something like that. And this is something that you don't want. You don't want to trap coolant or oil between the bolt and the cylinder block in a tight space. So I go around through each one of the holes with a little bit of compressed air and my rag to try and get out some of the debris or whatever that may be down in there. Something else you also might want to consider is using what's called a thread chaser, not a tap, but use a thread chaser for the bolt holes to clean the threads just the same way that you did on the bolts, but inside the block. So what I will do is I will just put my blowgun down in here and go through each one of the holes, making sure they're all free of any liquids or foreign contaminants. Before installing the gasket, I like to take the dowels out of wherever they get stuck. Sometimes they get down inside the cylinder block, and other times they get stuck inside the cylinder head. These were stuck inside the cylinder head. Try not to damage these. These have to remain somewhat cylindrical, but what these do is they help locate the cylinder head when you put it back down on the block, and also keep the head gasket itself in place. I know where these go, so I'm going to insert these now before I put the gasket on. If you're fortunate, your gasket will have an up indicator on it. Not all of them do, but this particular one does, and I'm grateful for it. So if it says up, install that side of the gasket up, because as you can see, it looks similar in both directions. However, it may not go on the same. These little holes need to line up in just the right way, and if they don't line up correctly, then you might want to try flipping the gasket over. That'll hold my gasket in place when I install my cylinder head. And of course you've cleaned the mating surfaces and everything before you've gotten to this point. But you want to try to make sure that you don't move the head around here a lot. You just want to try to nail it if you can. Because you don't want to scratch up I guess I did nail it. You don't want to scratch up the cylinder head when you try to install it. But you know it's on there when it's on there, and it looks like I put it right on there. And this cam is removed for another test that I was doing, but I'm putting it on this way now because it's a lot lighter and easier to handle without it in there. But and I can put the cam on after the head is installed, and it's going to be easier for you to see tightening all these head bolts as well. Doing all this for you. Take a good look at the head bolts. Line them all up. In this case, there's one that's going to be way longer than the rest. See them? And this one has a special place in the back of the cylinder head right here. Its riser is much higher than the other ones for the other head bolts. You might want to look for this before you start installing head bolts, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you got to torque something down and it's got about 2 inches before 2 inches more and it's bottomed out and you can't turn it down anymore. So keep an eye out for that. You just went through a bunch of effort to make these clean. I just lay them out on a clean rack instead of just on my bench to get dirty again. Next, I'm going to be inserting the head bolts one by one into their respective holes. But before I do, I'm going to add a little bit of oil to the threads on each one of these. Add a little bit of oil to the threads, and I'm going to put a little bit of oil underneath the washer here. And the reason for this is I want this head bolt to spin freely when I spin it to torque it. That's the idea behind it. So the washer is something that's going to stay still, so I want to make sure that it spins nice and smooth here and nice and smooth on the threads. I don't want it to hang up on anything, because if it does, that will affect the torque. So a little bit of oil here, a little bit of oil here, insert, and repeat. This is my special one right here. Now they're all inserted and ready to go. Alright, I know some of you are going to yell at me for doing this, but you must understand that I am not running these down all the way till they're tight. I'm just running them down until they make contact with the cylinder head. And I'm doing this in an effort to save time. But you can just as easily do this with a ratchet, or probably what might work even better is something like a speed wrench that you can run these down with. But just run them down till they make contact with the cylinder head, but do not tighten them at all. And the way I do this is I do it similar to the way that I'm going to use my torque pattern. I'll start in the center and then spiral my way out towards the edges. So start in the middle and then work your way around until you get to the outside. I find that interesting that I've got that much movement, but that may just be the gasket settling. Something we should have found out even before we did the job is the torque specs for the vehicle. Now, I already know on this Accord what this is, or what they're supposed to be, but the information is normally found in a service manual, or in this case, I actually Googled it to try to find out what the torque specs were, and many times they're in stages. So you don't necessarily just torque everything down all at once. You torque them down like in 1 stage, 2 stage, sometimes 3 stages, such as with this car, we're talking about 3 stages worth of torquing. And on this one, the first stage is 29 foot-pounds, the second stage is 51 foot-pounds, and finally it goes to 72 foot-pounds, or pound-feet of torque, as it is said, or Newton meters, which I'm not exactly sure what the Newton meter equivalent of those pound-feet is, depending upon what part of the world you're living in. So if you're no longer in the dark ages and using the metric system, good for you. Anyway, so you need to have the torque spec. As I said earlier, there are times where included in your torque spec you will find a degree setting. So in other words, torque it down to 35 foot-pounds and then another like 90 degrees or something like that. For that, you can't just eyeball it and say, well, that looks like 90 degrees. That's not an accurate way of doing it. For that, they have this special tool. It's called I think it's called a degree wheel. But what you do when you tighten the fasteners, you actually put this little arm out here to secure it against something, and then you zero up the gauge. Yeah, that is zero. You zero up the gauge, and then when you turn the center portion, what happens is this turns separately than everything else. So this will stay still, and you'll be able to move the degree wheel. I will cover this in another video, but that's what it is. So if you go find torque specs and you see degrees in the torque specs, then you need one of these, and you can borrow one from your local auto parts store or whatever. Other than that, you have a few choices as far as the types of torque wrenches go. One of my happiest days as a technician was when I finally bought my first set of real torque wrenches. I felt like the real deal at that point. And as you can see, I definitely spent some money on this Snap-on set. Now this particular type of torque wrench is called a clicker style, and the reason is, as you'll see in a moment, that as you reach the specified torque, what will happen is you will hear a click noise. And you set these on the barrel here. You can see a series of numbers here, and you basically turn it to the appropriate number. Like say my first one is 29, so I would turn this up to, in this case, it's in increments of 5. So I'd go up to 25, and when you get there, you'll see that there's a 0 on the 25. So I'll take it up to 25, and then plus 4 would be 29, and then it'll lock into place there. Show them what I want them to see. Okay, so it's on 25, and then I took it up to 4, and that equals 29. So this will be 29 pound-feet of torque that I'll be applying with this particular wrench. Very important. Don't ever take bolts off with a torque wrench. So don't ever break anything loose with a torque wrench. They're designed to move in one direction. Secondly, clicker type torque wrenches like these need to be periodically serviced and adjusted to ensure that they're torquing things accurately. So keep that in mind. Now, like most Hondas, or like most of these jobs, I've had to split this between two separate torque wrenches. So this is my big one. So when I get to 72, I'll use this one. And the reason for that is, the closer you are to the end of the scale on the torque wrench, so if you're all the way up towards the top or all the way down towards the bottom, really the less effective it is. The most effective range is right in the middle of where the torque wrench is. So this one goes up to 75 pound-feet, but I need to torque my final torque to 72. I don't necessarily want to use this little 3/8 one. I'm going to jump up to the 1/2 inch one because it will give me a more accurate torque, and plus that one's longer, and the more leverage you have, the more constant motion. This is what you're looking to do. You're looking to come up to the final torque with one constant motion. You want to try to avoid stopping before you get there. Next, some situations this is unavoidable, but you also want to avoid using lots of extensions. So you should only use one extension, and in fact they have specific extensions for torquing things. So some of you out there, maybe in the aerospace industry like that, are privy to this procedure, because torque is a very important thing in engineering. There's a certain stress loads that you're trying to calculate and put onto those parts, and what you're doing now is you're trying to get it as bang on as you possibly can. But this is a no-no. Long extensions and multiple extensions is a no-no when you're torquing. The reason is I can even move. You can even see this moving a little bit just when I turn it. That means the torque or twisting force is getting lost somewhere in here. That makes your wrench completely inaccurate. You don't want to do that. Oh, and the other types of wrenches are beam type wrenches. They also make digital type of torque wrenches and something else I'm not thinking of. But all will work. I'm using this. And this probably isn't the best setup either, but it's what I have. But I'm using the shortest extension I possibly can. And for the 1/2 inch final torque there, I'm going to have to put a different adapter on here, which I'm not exactly happy about, but it's what I have. And unfortunately, you'll probably be in a similar situation. But I'm trying to teach you what you're supposed to do so that you can get as close to that as possible. Also within the torque specs, you may find that there's a particular pattern, and they will show a picture of the cylinder head and the fasteners around the inside of it, and that pattern that you use to follow. Most of them, like they are on this Accord, are in a spiral pattern. But always start when you're torquing something from the center outward. Conversely, when you're removing a cylinder head, I start from the outside and work my way in. So when you're taking it off, outside in. When you're torquing it down, from the inside out. This is so that you can lay out the torque in a nice even spread across the cylinder head and distribute those forces as evenly as possible. But now we've got all our fasteners run down. We haven't started torquing anything yet, but let's start torquing it. Okay, we're going to start with the fasteners in the center. You can still see it's still a little bit loose here. We're going to start with these fasteners in the center and work our way outwards in a spiral pattern. Okay, and the first thing, our first spec that we're going to is the 29 foot-pounds. So I'll start to get it snug, and then the idea is that when you get to your final torque, you're making a nice clean arc. There you go, that's one. And what I mean when I say that nice clean arc, you want to be coming up to the torque. You don't want to get to the end. So you want to start far away and then bring it around. There you go, there's the other 29. I go in a right-hand spiral pattern. And after a while, you begin to feel when it's about to get tight, so prepare yourself. My socket back. This is sometimes hard to do when you're in tight spaces, but try to keep as close to these rules as possible. Okay, our next spec was 51. Like I said, this is towards the top of the range that this wrench is capable of. So this is the last one I'll be doing with this wrench. But I'm going to go around in the exact same pattern. But since I've already torqued it, I want to try to set myself up for my arc. There you go. That's why they call it a clicker type. I'm switching up this time around, but I'm still going in the same right-hand pattern. That's the reason why you wanted to lubricate those washers, so you don't get that ping ping pinging noise, because you want it to come up nice and clean. There you go. Now let's switch to the 1/2 inch. This one works the same as the other one. There's a 70, there's the 0, 71 I believe it was, and now we're right on 71 pound-feet. And this one also, no, this is just foot-pound. I don't believe it measures in Newton meters. Unfortunately, I'm having to use another extension here, or adapter, to get this to work. The ideal situation is just to have one socket. Well, I just went back and rechecked, and no, it's 72. So there you go. Number 2 is there, 70 just went past. Once again, start in the center and work your way outward. And try to get as clean and long an arc as you can. Changing it up again. I do it that way. And once you start, do not stop. See what I mean about that lubrication there? It's hard to tell when it clicks sometimes. I don't like the way that went. Those went a lot better. Now you can go back around and check them again if you like, just to be sure. Because there's a lot of bolts, and sometimes you miss. And that would be not good. Voila. One more thing I would like to add about these torque wrenches is that you never want to store them like with a reading on them. You always want to store them at 0. So when you're done using them, bring them back to 0. And actually, this torque wrench is about 12 years old. I like to keep it clean. It's one of my favorite tools. But yeah, like I said, when you're done with the wrenches and you're going to store them, these clicker types need to be zeroed out before you do that. To leave them on anything but 0 could be a problem, so keep that in mind. Alright, that about concludes our today's lesson in torquing cylinder head bolts. Lots of things get torqued. You'd be surprised at how many things, including wheels. So keep that in mind, and if you do, try and do it properly. And follow the instructions, because there may be special instructions. In fact, oftentimes there are special instructions for how to go about this procedure, either lubricating the fasteners, where to put the lubrication, what type of lubrication to use, cleaning out the bolt holes inside of whatever thing you're fastening it to, the treatment of the fasteners themselves. Engineers spend a whole lot of time with this stuff, and they get pretty uptight if they don't see it done correctly, mainly because they designed it to work a certain way. Also, if any of you out there, I know a lot of you watch my show that are professionals, have anything you'd like to add, please add it to the comments below. And those of you that are watching this for the first time and want to learn something I may not have covered in this video, you might want to check out those comments, because some of them end up being very good. Anyway, I'm Eric the Car Guy. You can always visit me at EricTheCarGuy.com. I'd love to see you there. And my tagline is be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. But the most important thing is to get out there and be dirty. Doesn't hurt. It'll be good for you. See you.